This is an NBC News special report. The trial of Donald J. Trump. Here is Lester Holt.
Good day again, everyone. It's just after 2 o'clock in the East. We are back on the air to bring you live coverage of the United States Senate as it takes up its constitutional duty to conduct the impeachment trial of President Donald Trump. There's Senator Mitch McConnell.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt.
Right now, they are just deciding
Mr.
on
Booker.
if they have a quorum, which they clearly
Mr.
do.
Bozeman.
The trial arrived at the Capitol. The articles of impeachment arrived a short time ago on the Senate side. Supreme Court Justice John Roberts is about to be escorted into the Senate chamber. This was moments ago. He'll be sworn in. He, in turn, will swear in the senators who will take an oath to, quote, do impartial justice under the Constitution and laws, so help me God, different than the one they took upon their election. So right now they're looking at a quorum. We understand there will be 99 senators in the room. Senator Inhofe is apparently indisposed with a family medical issue. Let's go to Casey Hunt right now on Capitol Hill. Casey, walk us through what we're about to see.
Lester, this is actually a pretty unusual scenario even now. It may seem as though our viewers have just flipped on the usual feed of the Senate floor, but it's very rare that all 100 of them would assemble on the floor at the same time and have to say that they are present and accounted for. So what you're hearing is the call of each name, which is something that we get used to hearing around here, but obviously a very special and somber occasion here. Senator Feinstein's name was just called. She's been one of the longest-serving members of the Senate and will be one of the 4 chosen to escort John Roberts, the Chief Justice, onto the floor of the Senate here in just a few moments. And of course, Roberts, the presiding officer over the Senate, an extraordinarily rare occurrence, of course, just for these impeachment trials, of which there have only been 3 in American history. So he will swear in the senators, all in this case, as you pointed out, 99 of them. They say that Senator Inhofe will be sworn in on Tuesday with no additional delay to the trial. But the senators who are here are going to stand together and take this oath, and then they'll be called in small groups to the front of the Senate to sign their names on a book, essentially underscoring their commitment to this oath to do impartial justice. And that, of course, that question of what impartial justice means is at the heart of what will unfold the next few weeks here in the United States Senate. And Republicans and Democrats seem to have very different conceptions of what that may mean as we sit here trying to figure out how this is going to unfold. Democrats have been repeating their calls for witnesses and documents. They say that more information is needed on the floor of the Senate as part of this inquiry than what is currently available from the House. Republicans say and are using that as evidence that the House rushed their impeachment inquiry and that they should have simply allowed more time for these things to have happened. So all of that, of course, in the weeks to come, Lester, as we watch these ceremonial circumstances play out on the floor.
All right, Casey, thank you. Moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, joins me here in New York. And Chuck, I'm going to let our viewers into something. We were sitting here talking a moment ago. Right. We don't quite remember exactly how the Clinton impeachment went, and even if we did, this
how
could
it was
run
televised. Yes.
Yeah, how it was. I'm sorry,
yes,
how it was televised. But in terms of how this one will play out.
Well, it was funny. There were days at a time where we went back and looked. There were days at a time where they would go into closed session, and it's just the senators, and it's a different type of closed session. There's no members of the press in there, and there might be 2 days where we know nothing about what's going on other than deliberations and maybe some leaks and things like that. But it was interesting. Yesterday I was talking to Russ Feingold, former senator from Wisconsin, who was was a senator during the Clinton impeachment, and he said this moment that they're about to have here, taking that oath. He said, and remember at that time it was the Democrats who thought, what are you guys doing? This is silly. And he says, and he was a Democrat, this thing is over, you guys overreached there in the House. So sort of the opposite role of what the Republicans are playing this time. And he says, you sit in that chair, you take that oath, you feel it. You feel the gravity of the moment. And he says, and you sit there and you have to listen. And he goes, I found the impeachment managers very compelling. And he goes, and he remembered talking to then Senator John Edwards and going, hey, did you find them compelling? And he goes, yes, I did too. He says, the point is that you don't quite know how senators are going to react once they have this moment. It is different. The weight of history will be heavy for some of them. I'm not saying all of them. It will be heavy for some of them that we might not be expecting.
They will be reminded of their votes.
That's right.
One way or the other. Andrea Mitchell joins us, and Andrea, you know, we're trying to figure out what this trial will look like. When you say trial, people's minds immediately go to a criminal trial. This is something different, and we're walking down this path, officially starting it, not quite knowing what it looks like.
Exactly, and some of those impeachment managers may turn out to be political superstars. Lindsey Graham was an impeachment manager as a House member, and of course went on to the Senate. Some of them may rise, some of them may fall over this. We don't know how strong their opening statements are going to be. What can they include in their opening statements? Can they include things that were not brought into evidence before? Things such as Lev Parnas's interview on MSNBC last night with Rachel Maddow and some of the things that he has said. Things like the GAO report today saying that the president broke a law, a budget law, the impoundment law, when he actually kept that congressionally approved bipartisan money from Ukraine for 55 days at a critical point when a hot war was going on in Ukraine. So there are a lot of things that have happened since the hearings ended some 4 weeks ago, and that, of course, has been the Speaker's claim that she was holding it back. But she was really not only holding it back to get more information, just to be perfectly blunt, they were clearly trying to negotiate something to get some leverage, which they have failed to get out of Mitch McConnell. We've yet to see what Mitch McConnell's actual rules of the road will be. He's going to pass resolutions. He's got the 51 votes probably for that right now, going into it in the next couple of days, if not today, as to how this trial will proceed and whether video will be permitted. We still don't know what kind, if witnesses are going to be permitted, and we see them arriving.
Yeah, this is the Senate Escort Committee bringing in Chief Justice Roberts into the chamber where he will be sworn in to preside over the impeachment of Donald Trump.
You okay? For impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, at this time, pursuant to Rule 4 of the Senate Rules on Impeachment and the United States Constitution, the presiding officer will now administer the oath to John G. Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States.
Previous order, the Escort Committee will now conduct the Chief Justice of the United States to the dais to be administered the oath. Should I stand?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm going to do announcement here first. Senators, I attend the Senate in conformity with your notice for the purpose of joining with you for the trial of the President of the United States. I am now prepared to take the oath.
Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws, so help you God?
I do.
God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Let me help you here.
At this time, I will administer the oath to all senators in the chamber in conformance with Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 of the Constitution and the Senate's impeachment rules. Will all senators now stand or remain standing and raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws, so help you God? The clerk will call the names in groups of 4, and senators will present themselves at the desk to sign the oath book.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett.
The senators, now all 99 present, signing this oath book after taking the oath and promising impartial justice. As we watch, excuse me, as we watch this, I'm going to bring in Pete Williams right now to talk more about the Chief Justice's role here. He immediately, obviously, took charge. He is presiding over this trial, but as we've noted, this is not a criminal trial, and so his powers are somewhat limited, or certainly open to challenge.
Yeah, a couple of things about this, Lester. First of all, number one, this whole thing has a sort of steam era quality to it, with the House having to go across the Capitol to tell the Senate what's going on. And the reason some of this seems rather musty is that the Senate is basically following the rules for the first impeachment trial, which have been largely unchanged since 1868. So, for example, formally today at 9:30 in the morning, the Chief Justice was, for the first time, formally told that he had to come over to the Senate and preside over the impeachment. And then you also heard him, again, perhaps underscoring the fact that this doesn't happen very often. Chuck Grassley had, as the presiding officer, the president pro tem, had his script that he was reading, and Roberts came in, and you may have heard him say, I've got a little announcement that I want to make. And we were told that he might say this, that he's there in response to the notice of the trial and is ready to take the oath, so sort of ad-libbing his way into this. But here's the way to think of this. It is a trial, and in a normal trial, the judge would make the legal rulings, the jury would make the findings of fact. Now, Roberts can, and the rules empower him to make decisions about who can be forced to appear, subpoenas that can be issued. He can rule on admissibility of evidence, whether questions are out of order, materiality, all the things that a trial judge would rule on. But here's the thing. The Senate can immediately overturn any ruling he makes by simple majority vote. There's no debate. Any senator objects, there's immediately a vote. You know, Roberts in his confirmation hearing famously said that the job of a Supreme Court justice is like a baseball umpire to call the balls and strikes. But this is like an umpire whose calls could be overturned by any members of the baseball team. So it is a very different thing for that. And we also know that Roberts has studied the Senate rules, so he knows how the rules work, and he's also studied past Senate impeachment trials, so he understands this limitation. His role is quite limited. He's going to want to try to preserve the decorum of the proceeding, but he's going to be more master of ceremonies than trial judge. Let
me bring in Michael Beschloss, our presidential historian. Michael, this whole process the last month or several months we've watched through has been defined by such bitter rancor. And what we've watched the last couple of days, there's a solemnity to all this, a respect, an appreciation for how serious it is. As they take that pledge today, as they sign this book, historically, have we seen senators approach it in a way that perhaps they didn't expect?
Well, I think that's the purpose of ceremony, to remind senators and all Americans that there's something larger. And that's something of the quality of this day. You know, it's been very somber and unusual, and that has been very intentional. Scene after scene that we don't normally see. Those House managers coming over from the House side, delivering the articles of impeachment, using words like upon pain of imprisonment, which was language that we heard this morning. The Chief Justice, just as Pete has said, coming into this situation where he doesn't have the almost total power that he has on the Supreme Court. He's going to have to exercise his influence almost in the margins with grace and sensitivity. So all this is intended to remind us that this is something that we don't normally see, and I think to remind every American that impeachment is not just a vote of no confidence. It's something that's done only in an extreme circumstance. That's why we've only seen this 3 times in history.
We saw the 7 House impeachment managers, the prosecutors, if you will, make an appearance earlier as they formally presented the articles. Let me go to Hallie Jackson right now at the White House. Hallie, what do we know about the president's legal team? Who will represent him in this trial?
The final announcement has not been made on that, Lester, but my sources in and around the administration tell me it will be led by White House counsel Pat Cipollone, perhaps not familiar to many of our viewers, as he has not taken a high-profile role in front of the cameras in the past as it relates to defending the president, but he will certainly face that spotlight in a serious way once the opening arguments of this trial get started. He will be joined by Jay Sekulow, somebody who has taken a role on television, on the radio, defending President Trump, especially throughout the special counsel investigation. And then there will be a couple of deputies and perhaps more that will be assisting Cipollone and Sekulow in making some of these arguments. I can tell you that a senior administration official is telling us that they believe this should move, they think, and they hope, fairly quickly. And in fact, there is a possibility that the president's defense team may not take up all the time that they are allotted in this, because they feel, in their words, like this is a very weak case that is being put on by the House impeachment managers. One official says that they believe it's extraordinarily unlikely that this takes longer than 2 weeks. If you step back, that may be an aggressive time frame, Lester, because there is still this question of witnesses. We simply do not know. Nobody right now has any idea how the witness question is going to go, and that is not something that is going to be addressed for maybe, you know, a week, 10 days or so from when the opening arguments start or from when the trial is now beginning. That's still an open question. So the speed factor is part of this for the president, because remember what he has coming up in a couple of weeks, his State of the Union address, where we could have the spectacle like we saw in 1999 with then President Bill Clinton of a commander-in-chief delivering this keynote primetime address in front of the very chamber that by day is working to decide whether or not to remove an impeached president from office. So that is something that the White House is cognizant of as well. President Trump is expected to be seen at some point in the Oval Office this afternoon. He's got an unrelated event to all of this, but it is possible he may want to react to what we are seeing right now. Frankly, Lester, even here at the White House, right down the other end of the road from Pennsylvania Avenue, you can feel the solemnity, you can feel the history here. Aides here at the White House know that and understand that. I wouldn't be surprised to hear the president speak on that today, as well as some of these other topics we've been discussing, including that explosive interview with a key player in this impeachment drama, Lev Parnas, a right-hand man of Rudy Giuliani's in Ukraine, as well as that Government Accountability Office report indicating that President Trump essentially violated a budget law, broke the law by ordering that freeze on military aid to Ukraine, Lester.
All right, Hallie Jackson,
Ms. Harris,
as we watch them now sign essentially the oath book, recognizing what they were sworn to a few moments ago. This essentially kicks off the trial. Carole Lamb is NBC News legal analyst and a former federal prosecutor. How does the trial essentially begins right now? So when they get together Tuesday, what begins to happen?
Well, on Tuesday, the House managers will be starting to present their cases. They'll be, you know, the 7 of them have to get together now and decide exactly how the case is going to be presented and which of them are actually going to be presenting at any given time. But they'll be relying a lot on, of course, the testimony and the documents that were considered during the House investigation process. There will be, at the same time, a lot of coordination about exhibits, and you know, I don't know whether they're going to be playing videotapes. I imagine they will, but
they don't know what they're going to be able to put out there.
By the way, they have to. I think they have to probably pass this. I mean, to do video, it'll be curious to see. I was thinking that same thing on exhibits. You'd think they would want to play some of the testimony.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think they'll probably have to pass a special law to allow video to be played. We've not seen the Senate floor used with video before.
Right. Well, you know, you'll remember that in the in the House Judiciary hearings, they were playing portions of the tapes, and this is what lawyers do in opening statement and closing argument. You play videotape testimony because that's the most impactful thing, short of actually having the live.
I think Pete Williams wants to weigh in here. Pete.
Well, they did play videotape clips during the Clinton trial on the Senate floor instead of having live witnesses. Now, at this stage, no decision has been made about witnesses. But, you know, the Clinton trial started the same way. There was no decision about witnesses before it, at this point either, after the Chief Justice and the senators had taken the oath. However, the prospects for a bipartisan agreement were much better during the Clinton trial. They don't seem to be making any headway right now.
And in terms of the timing of all this, whether it's 4 days or 3 weeks, How does that play in the public?
Well, and I think this is going to be an interesting challenge that I think the House managers have. Because of the ability at any moment in time to essentially take a ruling and deliberate on it. This is a way to essentially slow down the trial. It may be hard to build a narrative. It may be hard to, part of this is a public relations. You've got to see if you've got the public following this as well. If there are 2- and 3-day gaps in the trial as they're deliberating on a motion on something, and it may be a stall tactic for all we know. Maybe there may be a senator there that uses these motions as ways.
And people consume news much differently.
That's right. And so if you lose, there's a sense where the narrative could fall off, and and how much attention to this graph. I think that's an interesting thing to follow and to see. Is that part of the strategy of some of the president's supporters in the Senate to just try to muck it up, right? Slow it down, process it up. We've known during this impeachment, when the facts are front and center, it's not good for the president. But in process is front and center, it's not good for Washington, right? That's when the public starts tuning out. So I do think that's going to be something to watch for. But look, obviously we have a political calendar. This is all running in. We've talked about the State of the Union. Bill Clinton, he was very careful not to talk about it very much publicly, the Senate trial at the time. I remember that. He had an amazing ability to compartmentalize in public.
Mr. Markey.
This president does not compartmentalize in public.
Ms.
What
McSally.
this State of the Union will look like in the midst of a Senate trial versus the one we can forecast, we can presume, but we'll see. And then, of course, there's the presidential race. If this stays 37 days, start to finish, was the Clinton trial, from articles and all of that stuff, from beginning to end. If you use this same 37 days, this takes us through Iowa, Lester, through the New Hampshire primary, right up until the eve of the Nevada caucuses. So this could have a huge impact on who the nominee is.
And by the way, you have people in that room right now who would otherwise might be on the campaign trail.
And why are we here in the first place? Because Donald Trump's obsessed with facing Joe Biden, who may be the biggest beneficiary from the timing of this trial.
All right, Andrea Mitchell.
Well, one thing we do know is that from Democratic sources, Chuck Schumer is planning to slow this down at the outset on Tuesday. If they don't get any kind of an agreement from Mitch McConnell, unlikely, on witnesses until after opening statements, the Democrats are planning to slow it down with a series of motions on Tuesday, according to our reporting, that will mean taking a step back and not having opening arguments, perhaps even until Wednesday or later, if they continue to file motions to get a witness agreement up front before they go into the trial. And looking back in 1999, Tom Daschle and Trent Lott, the Democratic Majority Leader Daschle, and Trent Lott, the Republican, they didn't have an agreement, as Pete Williams was saying earlier, up front, but they worked it out. There was a lot of arguing back and forth, but they came together, had a joint news conference in the Senate gallery, and told all of the reporters, we're going to work this out, we're going to make this happen, and they did work it out in a matter of days. So you had a much less toxic, poisonous environment. And of course, the President of the United States was not running for re-election. This is the first time that an impeachment is happening in the first term of a presidency when a re-election is in play, and as Chuck was just pointing out, we're in the middle of the election calendar. Yeah. The Republicans are still hoping to shut out witnesses. Whether or not Mitch McConnell will have those 51 votes remains to be seen.
Casey Hunt on Capitol Hill right now. Casey, where are we?
So just to underscore that point that Andrea was just making about the differences between the Clinton trial and now, and we remember it as being so incredibly acrimonious. Relationships here on Capitol Hill since then have just devolved to a place that is so much different than where we were then. She was talking about a closed session, the Senate, all 100 senators in a room by themselves, talking amongst each other to work out an agreement for how the trial would proceed. That is simply not happening at all here between Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and their associated caucuses and conferences and members. You also, back then, had figures in the Senate, Robert Byrd, chief among them, who were concerned about sort of the history, the tenor, the depth of the institution, and what that would mean in the context of such a political process. And they, on both sides, he was a Democrat, but both Democrats and Republicans worked together to try to make sure he wouldn't get upset about something. You were talking about televisions on the floor of the Senate, which, as Pete pointed out, were used to present evidence. But they had an issue because Robert Byrd insisted, he was so offended by the idea of televisions on the floor of before the Senate, that they be covered up when not in use, and they overheated and they didn't work right when they went to try to present that evidence. Obviously, so much of that has changed now, but I think that overarching point that everything is so partisan, every single action is interpreted as a slap in the face to the other side and vice versa, it really has changed, I think, the tenor and tone of the way that this particular institution works. It's a small place, only 100 people. They used to know each other very well, and there used to be sort of pushes and pulls and pressures and factions that didn't necessarily only break down along party lines. And I think in this trial, that simply we know already isn't going to be the case. And as for the timing, you know, I do think, to Chuck's earlier point as well, it seems to me right now that Republicans are pushing, particularly those allied with Mitch McConnell, are pushing for this to be over as quickly as possible, potentially before the State of the Union. It is not very hard to lay out a case where Democrats can push it over top of the State of the Union. We obviously don't know. We do know that they have some tools available to them, these motions that Andrea was speaking about, but it's really not hard to see a scenario where this goes past 2 weeks. And then, of course, there's that big witness question, and that could push it for weeks and weeks again on end. It's really hard to sit here and say, and as Chuck pointed out, this could be going deep into the political season. Still, House Democrats are going to get the chance to make the first case directly to the American people.
Yeah, let's talk about the legal strategy. Carole Lamb, if the Democrats were able to slow this thing down, pump the brakes, would that be with the knowledge that they've got more stuff coming in? Does it buy them time to create a stronger case?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily the knowledge, but the possibility of. And that's what makes this particular impeachment trial so fraught, I think even more so than the Clinton impeachment trial, because what you have is an allegation that the president obstructed the congressional investigation, and that is still going on. The obstruction, in other words, the Democrats believe is still going on.
Crime in progress.
Right, and so as more days go by, you always have more possibility that another Lev Parnas interview is going to come out, or more documents are going to be revealed. And the more people who start cooperating, it invites others to start cooperating as well, either because they're concerned about their own fate and they want to, they want to get on the good side of federal investigators, or because they feel less alone in coming forward. So you have this very strange situation where trial is going on, additional evidence may come out day by day, and every time that happens, there's going to be a motion that now we should hear this evidence as well.
Look what happened during the, just to underscore what Carole said, look what happened during the initial investigation. Look what Gordon Sondland, who now is probably as important of a witness as there is, essentially the first-hand witness of the quid pro quo aspect of thing. The moment seemed to squeeze him a little bit, and he suddenly, his story changed, and he suddenly felt as if he had to give more. Look at what Lev Parnas has done. A couple of visits from the Southern District of New York, and suddenly he's offering information. I mean, this is what's so dangerous to the president, is that the opportunity for good old-fashioned Perry Mason moments, which normally don't happen in trials, in this case is possible because you never know what Lev Parnas or other Giuliani character shows up and suddenly upends what we think we know about.
How much pressure has that, Lev Parnas, how much has that put on this idea of getting live witnesses in there, or even on video?
This is, to me, I don't know, because there's a lot. Look, Lev Parnas is not he's got credibility issues. You've got to take that. You've got to take that into account as you see what he is dumping. The fact that he appears to be cherry-picking what he's dumping, too, that shouldn't make people feel fully comfortable, no matter which side of the perspective you are. But it's clear what the House Democrats have decided to do. Just put it out there. Let us look at it, meaning the press and the public. And the question will be, how much is it infused in the arguments that they make? How much do they try to take? Carole, I'm curious, do you think they will use some of the Parnas evidence themselves, or maybe just allude to it, because there is some question about some senators are going to object if they try to bring that in?
Well, here's the thing. If this were a normal criminal trial in normal court, the documents that were put in that were obtained from Lev Parnas from his phone...
Any senator who was not in the Senate chamber at the time the oath was administered to the other senators will make that fact known to the chair so that the oath may be administered as soon as possible.
The Sergeant in Arms will make the proclamation.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons are commanded to keep silent on pain of imprisonment while the House of Representatives is exhibiting to the Senate of the United States articles of impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States.
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. Chief Justice, for the information of the Senate, on my behalf and that of the distinguished Democratic leader, I'm about to propound several unanimous consent requests that will assist with the organization of the next steps of these proceedings. They deal largely with necessary paperwork incident to the trial. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the summons be issued in the usual form, provided that the President may have until 6 p.m. on Saturday, January the 18th, 2020, to file his answer with the Secretary of the Senate, which will be spread upon the Journal, and the House of Representatives have until 12 noon on Monday, January 20th, 2020, to file its replication with the Secretary of the Senate. Finally, I ask consent that the Secretary of the Senate be authorized to print as a Senate document those documents filed by the parties together to be available to all parties.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that if the House of Representatives wishes to file a trial brief, it be filed with the Secretary of the Senate by 5 p.m. on Saturday, 20th, 2020. Further, that if the House wishes to file a rebuttal brief, it be filed with the Secretary of the Senate by 12 noon on Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. Finally, I ask consent that the Secretary of the Senate be authorized to print as a Senate document all documents filed by the parties together to be available for all parties.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that in recognition of the unique requirements raised by the impeachment trial of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, the Sergeant at Arms shall install appropriate equipment and furniture in the Senate chamber during all times that the Senate is sitting for trial with the Chief Justice of the United States presiding. The appropriate equipment, furniture, and computer equipment in accordance with the allocations and provisions I now send to the desk and ask that they be printed in the record.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate sitting as a court of impeachment adjourn until Tuesday, January the 21st, 2020 at 1 p.m.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The Senate sitting as court of impeachment is adjourned until Tuesday, January 21st at 1 p.m.
And the Chief Justice dropping the gavel there, and they'll get back at business after the King holiday Tuesday at 1 p.m. So these will be, Chuck, into the early evening.
It is. The Clinton trial went from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., and it was our sense that they were probably going to do the same schedule. That seems to be. They didn't say when, what each day, but the idea was let the Senate have some opportunity to do morning business. 1 to 6, essentially, if they have to go behind closed doors. By the way, they will meet Saturdays. They will meet every day, Monday through Saturday. They're not meeting this Monday because it's a federal holiday, Martin Luther King holiday. But from that, non-federal holidays, they will meet 6 days a week, not 5, with Sundays being the only day off. So if you're a presidential candidate, basically what they're going to be doing is probably, if you've got some money like Bernie Sanders, hopping on a plane at about 7 o'clock, getting to Iowa, and then coming back first thing in the morning.
That's a grueling schedule.
It's going to be rough for those guys.
Pete Williams, we note that the Chief Justice has a day job. He's going to be a busy man, too.
Right. So that's one of the reasons why the rules say that the Senate doesn't start on this impeachment trial until 1 in the afternoon. The Supreme Court hears oral argument and issues decisions in the morning. They'll be doing that on Tuesday morning. The Chief Justice will start his day there. They'll hear arguments in 2 cases. It'll happen again on Wednesday. So it gives him time to do the business of his day job and then get across the street to the Capitol for the start of the afternoon trial. All
right. And Casey Hunt, we should know the Senate was busy today approving the president's trade deal with Canada and Mexico. They've got a lot of other business at hand.
They do, Lester, although for the most part, at least the public version of that is going to be put on hold while everyone is focused on impeachment. That said, as you point out, they did find some time to pass the USMCA trade deal. This is, of course, a top priority for the Trump administration, but also something that has somewhat unexpectedly gotten broad support here in the Congress after some changes in the House of Representatives. So, yes, business does go on to a certain extent, but let's underscore that for a United States Senator, the experience of being a juror in this trial is the opposite of everything they normally do every day. Instead of giving speeches, putting themselves out there, they're going to have to sit and listen and struggle not to fall asleep, frankly. It's something that happened not uncommonly during the Clinton years, and that's really, not what we normally see from the senators here. I also should point out in terms of the timing, last time around, both the House managers and the White House gave back some of their time for arguments. The senators gave no extra time back for their part of the trial, Lester, which is, of course, their questions. So you might expect them to take all 16 hours of that if that's what they have available to them.
Hallie Jackson is at the White House right now. Hallie, for months, the president has called this a witch hunt, a hoax. It's very real. What we saw there, the Chief Justice banging the gavel. This trial is on. Is there any change of tone from the White House?
Not at the moment, Lester. And to be honest, given what we've seen from the president and the administration over the last several months, I would be if that were to happen, any kind of a change in tone. You have to remember that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi knows, as we have reported since really the day these impeachment proceedings began, this is not a president who wants to be impeached. He does not like that asterisk that is next to his name now for all time. And the House Speaker has made very clear she is aware of that, and she is sort of digging into that with the comments that she's made over the last 24 hours, pointing out that this is a mark that cannot and will not be erased, no matter how this Senate trial goes. And the expectation, of course, is that right now there are simply just not the votes to remove Donald Trump from office. Nobody thinks that that is a realistic possibility at the moment. I will say that for the president and the White House, the challenge now, this is a president who is engaged in television coverage in a way that we have not seen from past presidents, and certainly did not see the last and the only time that there was a president impeached in modern televised history, and that was Bill Clinton. I am curious to see what kind of counter-programming, if any, the White House implements. Clinton did. That has been occasional but not consistent with this administration, Lester.
We might expect rallies, further rallies, which the president is doing.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Hallie. Let me go to a presidential historian, Michael Beschloss, for a thought about where we are today and what this potentially does to the country.
Well, I think it's going to be a big test of us as a country. You know, sometimes people say, have we ever been as divided as we have been during the last couple of years? And, you know, you have to go back to the time of the mid-19th century and the tumultuous time around the time of the Great Depression, the division over whether we should get involved in fighting Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in 1940. So we've been through times like this before, but it happens that you have a crisis like this. It tests the ability of a country to unify. We're going to know a lot more about this country 4 weeks from now than we do today.
All right, Michael, thank you. And so a day of solemn ceremony on Capitol Hill, setting the stage for the Senate impeachment trial of President Donald Trump, something extremely rare in our history, as has been noted. The trial will begin Tuesday with major questions about witness testimony and access to evidence, including a good deal of new evidence still unresolved. We'll, of course, be following it all for you. I'll be back on with a full wrap-up of today's developments when I see you on NBC Nightly News. For all of us at NBC News, I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day.